There are moments in life that split everything into a before and after. Moments so quiet on the surface, so ordinary in their beginning, that you would never see them coming. Sandra had one of those moments on a warm Saturday evening in June. She was 19 years old, wearing a yellow sundress her mother had ironed for her that morning, and she was smiling. She was happy. She was surrounded by family. And that, more than anything, is what made what happened next so devastating. Because she never once thought she had a reason to be afraid. She was home. Or at least, she thought she was.
Before we begin, let me know in the comment where you're watching from. Would love to hear from you, and your support helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos.
Sandra Mitchell grew up in a small suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio. She was the kind of girl who remembered everyone's birthday, who brought casseroles to neighbors when they were sick, who laughed a little too loud at her own jokes and never seemed to mind. She had grown up in a close-knit family, the kind where holidays meant 30 people crowded into someone's living room, where cousins became best friends, where the word family was almost sacred. Her mother, Diane, had raised her to believe that no matter what happened in the world outside, family would always be your anchor. Blood doesn't lie, Diane used to say, stirring something on the stove, not even looking up. Sandra had believed that with her whole heart. She had never had a reason not to. Her father had passed away when she was 12, and in the years that followed, her extended family had rallied around them. Aunts brought food. Uncles fixed the leaky faucet her father never got around to repairing. Cousins checked in on her mother. It was that kind of family. So when Sandra received the invitation to her cousin Renee's birthday celebration in late June, she didn't hesitate for even a second. Renee was turning 25, and the party was being held at the home of their older cousins, Kevin and Marcus, two brothers who had done well for themselves in the years since Sandra had last seen them. Kevin was 28 and worked in finance.
Marcus was 30 and had recently launched a small logistics company. They lived together in a large house in a gated community about 40 minutes from Sandra's apartment. Sandra hadn't seen either of them in almost 3 years. Life had simply gotten busy, but family was family.
She called her mother the morning of the party, excited in the way only someone who genuinely loves their people can be. "Mom, I'm actually looking forward to this. I've missed everybody." Diane laughed on the other end of the line and told her to bring a cardigan because it would get cold later. Sandra threw a light jacket in her bag, touched up her lip gloss in the mirror, and drove to the party alone because her roommate had plans that evening. She remembered thinking as she pulled out of the apartment parking lot that it was one of those evenings where everything felt just right. The sky was the kind of orange that only happens in June. The radio played a song she loved. She was going to see family. Nothing could go wrong.
The house was exactly what she had expected. Large, immaculate, filled with the warm chaos of a family gathering done well. There were fairy lights strung along the porch. There were cars parked all the way down the street. She could hear music before she even got out of the car, and the smell of grilled food hit her the moment she opened her door. She stood there for just a second, breathing it in. It smelled like every summer cookout she had ever attended growing up. It smelled like safety. She walked up the driveway and pushed open the front door, and the noise and warmth of family wrapped around her immediately. Kevin spotted her first. He crossed the room with a wide smile, arms already open. "Sandra, look at you!" He was taller than she remembered, broader in the shoulders, with a confident, easy way about him that made the room feel like it naturally organized itself around him. He hugged her and introduced her to a few people standing nearby, and she felt herself relax in the way you only relax when you're among people who have known you your whole life. Marcus appeared a few minutes later, equally warm, equally welcoming. He handed her a cup of fruit punch and told her she looked exactly the same as she had at their grandmother's birthday dinner 3 years ago. She laughed and said he did too, even though he didn't. He looked older, more polished, but it was the kind of easy lie you tell when you're happy to see someone. The evening unfolded beautifully in those first couple of hours. Sandra found Renee and hugged her so hard they both nearly spilled their drinks. She sat with aunts she hadn't seen in months and listened to her Uncle Raymond go on about his new vegetable garden for nearly 20 minutes, nodding along with genuine interest.
She danced a little in the backyard with cousins her own age. She ate too much potato salad. She felt genuinely and completely like herself. This was her family. These were her people. And Kevin and Marcus moved around the party like gracious hosts, always checking in, always refilling glasses, always making sure everyone was comfortable. They were attentive. They were charming. If anything, Sandra thought how lucky Renee was to have brothers like that.
It was around the 2-hour mark when Sandra first noticed something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't anything specific. It was more of a texture, a slight shift in the atmosphere that she couldn't point to directly. Kevin had brought her a second drink. Something he said was a mix of lemonade and sparkling water with a splash of something sweet, and she'd taken it without thinking because she trusted him. Why wouldn't she? He was her cousin. She sipped it, and it tasted fine, slightly stronger than she expected, but she assumed it was just the sparkling water making it taste different. She set the cup down on a side table and went back to the conversation she was having.
About 30 minutes later, Marcus appeared at her elbow and suggested he show her the rest of the house. Kevin redid the whole upstairs, he said. You have to see it. Sandra agreed. She was curious about the house, and she liked Marcus's easy company. He led her through the kitchen, down a hallway lined with framed family photos. She stopped and looked at a few, pointing out relatives and laughing at old hairstyles, and up a wide staircase. The upstairs was quieter. The music from the backyard felt farther away up here, muffled and distant. She noticed the carpet was very thick, the kind that absorbed sound. Marcus showed her a home office, a guest room with a view of the garden, a large bathroom with marble countertops. He talked easily the whole time, asking about her job, her apartment, whether she was seeing anyone. She answered naturally, not thinking anything of it. It was normal conversation, family conversation.
But then she noticed that Marcus didn't lead her back downstairs after the tour. Instead, he lingered near the doorway of the guest room, asking more questions, laughing a little too loudly at his own observations, staying close. She couldn't pinpoint exactly what felt wrong. He wasn't saying anything inappropriate. He wasn't doing anything overtly strange. But something in the quality of his attention made her feel, for the first time that evening, slightly uncomfortable. She told herself she was being silly. She told herself he was just being friendly. She said she should probably get back to Renee and move toward the hallway, and he stepped aside easily enough, still smiling. She told herself she had imagined it.
Downstairs, she looked for her phone and couldn't find it. She had set it down somewhere, on the table near the drinks, she thought. But when she went back to look, it wasn't there. She wasn't alarmed, not yet. Phones got moved at parties all the time. She asked a few people nearby if they'd seen it. No one had. Kevin appeared and said he'd help her look. He checked behind the couch cushions, moved some cups around on the table, suggested it might have slipped under something. He was helpful, patient. And the whole time he was helping her, he was steering the search further and further from the crowded back patio toward the quieter parts of the house. She followed him because he was helping her, because he was her cousin.
She felt the room tilt just slightly. Not dramatically, not the way it does in movies when someone realizes something terrible. Just a subtle heaviness in her limbs, a slight lag in her thoughts, like she was thinking through wet cotton. She told herself she was just tired. She had been on her feet all evening. She probably hadn't eaten enough, or the fruit punch had gone to her head. Kevin noticed her pause near the kitchen doorway and said she looked tired. He said she could rest upstairs for a bit, just 20 minutes, and she'd feel better. Marcus appeared from somewhere and agreed. Yes, rest, just a few minutes. There was a quiet room upstairs. She remembered saying she was fine. She remembered saying she should probably just call it a night and head home. She remembers the words forming in her mouth. But the distance between thinking something and making it happen had grown strangely wide. She could hear her family laughing right below her while she lay in that room trying to understand what had just happened to her. She has said in interviews that the sound of that laughter was the thing that broke her the most, not the silence, the laughter. She found her phone on the nightstand. She would later wonder how it got there. She called no one. She sat up, straightened her dress, and walked down the stairs past two cousins who waved at her from the kitchen, past her Aunt Lorraine, who told her she looked pale and asked if she'd eaten, past Kevin, who was standing near the front door talking to someone, and who turned and smiled at her as she passed. She did not stop. She did not say a word. She walked out the front door and to her car, and she sat in the driver's seat for a long time before she could make herself start the engine.
She drove home. She took a shower so long the water ran cold. She sat on the edge of her bed in her bathrobe, and she looked at the wall, and she thought, "These are my cousins. These are people who came to my father's funeral. These are people I grew up with. These are people my mother trusts." And she thought, "If I say this out loud, no one will believe me." And that thought, that specific, particular, devastating thought, is what kept her silent for the next 11 days.
Think about that for a moment. Think about what it means to carry something that heavy completely alone, and to be afraid that the people who are supposed to love you will look at you and choose not to believe you. How would you feel? If that were your sister, your daughter, your friend, what would you want her to know? If you believe family should be a place of protection, not danger, hit the like button so this story reaches more people. Awareness matters.
Those 11 days were the longest of Sandra's life. She went to work, she answered texts, she responded to her mother's messages with short, cheerful replies. She watched Kevin post a photo from the party on social media, a group shot with family, everyone smiling, her own face visible at the edge of the frame, and she stared at it for so long her eyes burned. She thought about those words her mother used to say, "Blood doesn't lie," and she wanted, desperately, for that to be true in a different direction than the one she now knew it was. She ate almost nothing. She slept in short, broken stretches. Her roommate, Tasha, noticed that something was wrong, but couldn't get Sandra to say what it was. Sandra would just say she was tired. Work stress. She was fine.
But on the 11th day, a Tuesday, Sandra came home from her shift at the dental office where she worked as a receptionist and sat down at the kitchen table and did not get up for a very long time. Tasha came home at 7:30 and found her there, still in her work clothes, staring at nothing. Tasha sat down across from her and said quietly, "Sandra, talk to me." And Sandra looked at her best friend, this person who was not blood, who was not family in the technical sense, but who had shown up for her more consistently than most of the people in her family tree. And she opened her mouth, and 11 days of silence finally came out.
She talked for almost 2 hours. Tasha did not interrupt. Tasha did not question. Tasha did not say, "Are you sure?" or "Maybe you misunderstood?" or any of the other things Sandra had been terrified of hearing. She just listened. And when Sandra was finished, she said, "Okay, what do you need from me right now?" And that was the moment Sandra began to survive.
The next morning, Tasha drove her to a hospital. Sandra underwent an examination. She was calm in the way that people are calm when they have already grieved in private for so long that they have temporarily run out of emotion, and what's left is just action. The medical staff were professional and gentle. The findings were documented. A nurse asked her if she wanted to involve law enforcement, and Sandra said yes. Not loudly, not dramatically, just yes. One quiet, clear, unbreakable word.
The police report was filed that same day. 2 detectives were assigned to the case within the week. They spoke to Sandra in a small room with a box of tissues on the table and a window that looked out over a parking lot. And she answered every question as precisely as she could, even the ones that made her have to reach back into parts of that evening she had been trying not to revisit. She told them about the drink. She told them about the upstairs tour. She told them about the way her thoughts had gone thick and slow. She told them about finding her phone on the nightstand. She told them about Kevin smiling at her as she walked out the front door. The detectives listened. They took notes. They told her she had done the right thing by coming forward.
She caught her mother on a Friday evening, sitting in her car in the parking lot of a Target because she needed the feeling of a neutral place, somewhere that didn't carry any weight. Diane answered on the second ring, cheerful, mid-sentence about something she'd seen on television. Sandra waited for her to finish, and then she said, "Mom, I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me get all the way through it before you say anything." Diane's voice changed immediately. the mother instinct. "Okay, baby, I'm listening." Sandra told her the whole thing. She was steadier than she expected to be. When she finished, the line was quiet for a long moment. Then Diane said, "I believe you." 3 words. Sandra pressed her forehead against the steering wheel and cried in a way she hadn't let herself cry since it happened. She cried because her mother believed her. She cried because she had been so afraid for 11 days that the love of her family would not be big enough to hold this truth.
But the rest of the family was not her mother. Within days of Kevin and Marcus being formally contacted by detectives, the family fractured in the way that families fracture when something unspeakable forces everyone to choose a side. Aunt Lorraine called Diane and said Sandra must have been confused, that she had seemed fine when she walked out. An uncle posted something vague but pointed on social media about people tearing families apart for attention. 2 cousins who Sandra had danced with at the party stopped responding to her messages.
Renee, whose birthday party it had been, sent Sandra a text that said she needed time to process everything, and then Sandra didn't hear from her again for 4 months. There were others, though, family members who called Sandra directly and said they were sorry, that they loved her, that they were on her side without reservation. But their support, real as it was, could not repair the specific wound of feeling publicly doubted by the people who had known her entire life. Because here's the thing about family betrayal that is different from any other kind. It doesn't just take the thing that was taken from you. It takes your history.
Ask yourself, if you were in Sandra's position, and the people who had hailed you at family dinners and cheered for you at graduations suddenly looked at you like you were the problem, how would that reshape the way you see the word family? Formal charges were filed against Kevin and Marcus 7 months after Sandra reported what had happened. The charges were serious. The evidence, including the medical documentation from Sandra's examination and toxicology findings that suggested she had been given a substance she had not knowingly consumed, was significant enough that both men were required to appear in court. Marcus's logistics company quietly fell apart in the months that followed as business partners withdrew. Kevin took a leave of absence from his finance job. Their names circulated in the community in the particular way that names circulate when something has happened that everyone is aware of but no one quite knows how to discuss in public. Sandra continued to go to work. She started seeing a therapist named Dr. Renata Hollis, a woman in her late 40s with a calmed voice and a corner office where the afternoon light came in through the blinds and long, warm stripes. Dr. Hollis did not give Sandra a list of steps to healing or a timeline for recovery. She just helped Sandra figure out what she needed each week, sometimes to talk through what had happened, sometimes to talk about something else entirely, sometimes just to sit in a room where she felt safe and have someone bear witness to the fact that she was still here.
Sandra has said that therapy did not fix anything, but it gave her a place to put things down for an hour at a time, and that was enough. She also began, slowly and carefully, to rebuild her understanding of herself. Because the gaslighting, a coordinated and deliberate campaign of doubt directed at a young woman who had done nothing wrong, had worked, at least partially, at least for a while. Sandra had caught herself at 2 a.m, more than once, running through the events of that evening and wondering if she had misread something, if there was an alternate version of events in which she bore some portion of responsibility. Dr. Hollis helped her see those thoughts for what they were. Not evidence of confusion or guilt, but evidence of the damage that gaslighting does, which is to make the person who was harmed and to the person who was most uncertain about what happened.
The trial lasted 9 days. Sandra testified. She sat in the witness box and looked at the 2 men who had been her cousins since before she could form long sentences, and she told the truth. She did not look away. She has said that it was both the hardest and the most clarifying experience of her life. That in that room, under oath, she finally felt the full weight of what it meant to choose herself. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When the verdicts came back, Sandra was sitting in a small room just outside the courtroom with her mother on one side and Tasha on the other, both of them holding her hands. She heard the word guilty, and then she heard it again. And then she sat very still for a long moment, and her mother pressed her face against Sandra's hair. And Sandra didn't cry, not immediately. She felt something quieter than that, a deep, still settling, like something that had been suspended in the air for almost a year had finally, at last, come to rest.
Kevin and Marcus were sentenced. A few family members who had doubted Sandra reached out in the days that followed. Awkward, belated messages that ranged from genuine remorse to self-protective attempts to rewrite their earlier positions. Sandra answered some of them. She did not answer others. She says that forgiveness is not a destination she is trying to reach. It is not something she owes anyone. What she is focused on is something different, on understanding who she is now, on figuring out which relationships in her life are built on something real, on learning to trust herself again after a period in which the people she trusted most had used that trust against her. Her mother still calls her every morning. Tasha is her maid of honor for a wedding Sandra hasn't planned yet, but is no longer afraid to imagine having. She runs in the mornings. She laughs too loud at her own jokes. She is, in every meaningful way, still herself. And that, she has said, is the thing Kevin and Marcus never accounted for. They took something from her that night, but they didn't take her.
Sandra didn't just lose her sense of safety that night. She lost something more fundamental than that. She lost the idea, the deeply held, childhood-constructed idea, that blood automatically means protection, that family means you are safe. And in losing that idea, she had to build something truer in its place. Not the comfortable fiction that love is always where it's supposed to be, but the harder, more honest understanding that love is a choice, that safety is something you build with people who have earned it, not people who are simply assigned to you by birth, that the most dangerous kind of harm is not the kind that comes from strangers in the dark. It is the kind that comes wearing a familiar face and a warm smile at a family party on a Saturday evening in June.
Because sometimes the people who smile at you in family photos are the ones you should have been afraid of all along. And the worst part, the part that Sandra could not have been prepared for, is that you loved them first. Sometimes justice isn't just about a verdict. It's about refusing to stay silent. It's about a 19-year-old girl in a yellow sundress deciding on a Tuesday evening, 11 days after the worst night of her life, that her truth was worth more than their comfort.
If this story moved you, share it. You never know who is watching this right now and needed to hear that they are not alone. You never know who has been carrying something in silence because they were afraid no one would believe them. Share this so that they know that speaking the truth, even when it costs you everything, is always worth it. And if you have ever been betrayed by someone you loved, by anyone, in any way, just know that what happened to you is not a reflection of your words. It is a reflection of their choices. And your story does not end where they try to end it. Subscribe for more real stories that need to be told. This community exists because these stories matters, because the people inside them matters. We'll see you in the next one.